Welcome to the Empower LEP podcast. I'm your host, Jana Parker, licensed educational psychologist, group practice owner and mentor at Empower LEP. Today, I had the privilege of hosting Dr. Ray Christner. He is he's done a bazillion things. He is a school psychologist and a clinical psychologist. He lives out in Pennsylvania, but he does trainings and workshops all over the nation. He has a podcast called the Psyched to Practice podcast. He has 2 new books coming out. He is working on publishing a new assessment that's coming out in 2026 with PAR. And he was a group practice owner. He's now a private practice owner. He's done like everything. He's an entrepreneur and he's just a really great guy. So I had a total pleasure talking to him. And as always, I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. Welcome back to the Empower LEP podcast. I'm here today with Dr. Ray Christner. Ray, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being with you.
Yeah, well, I feel like I've been hanging out with you already today because I listened to your most recent episode of the Psyched to Practice podcast this morning.
Oh, thanks. That's great.
Yeah, well, and I think it was really timely. It's not like I haven't heard every single episode, but this one was really timely because it was about mentorship.
Yeah.
And that's it really resonated with kind of my mission for Empower LEP. And really the scope of this podcast too, because I like to bring on people who can talk about different things that they're doing with their psychology practice and as entrepreneurs or as people who are doing things on social media or developing platforms or, just doing different things that spark their own interests and skill sets, and then they use them to inspire others, help others, mentor others. And so the podcast is really about hearing the stories of people who are mentors really in a way, and who are using their skills in really just cool ways that will help to help others think about different things that they might do, or just kind of get the juices flowing. So
yeah, and I think all of us that are in a mentorship role now, we look back and we've had great mentors that got us here, right? I mean, it was one of my favorite episodes that we've done in a while because it was a lot of me going back and thinking of all the times and little pieces that somebody just gave me that little tidbit and it took me on a different path. So yeah, I think mentorship, we can't underestimate that value, I think, in our field.
yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I've always found people to mentor me in different ways, whether it be for my clinically or in terms of business. And through Empower LEP, we do individual mentorship because some people just have like a lot of questions and they want an hour of answers, or an hour of consultation or an hour of like, let's kind of really hash this out and see what we can do, whether it be clinically or business. And then other people want a group mentorship experience. So we have that too. And then we learn from each other, right? Because not any one person knows everything, right? So the group experience is also really pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's part of, I've said this about being a supervisor, like an intern supervisor, but I think it applies to mentorship too, is I learn sometimes more than I think I give other people. It's such a great kind of reciprocal process. So yeah, love doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was kind of a tangent, but
Yeah.
Dr. Ray Christner has a podcast called Psyched to Practice, and you also just do so many other interesting things that I'd really love to hear about all the things that you are doing currently. And then I want to take you back in time into your path kind of to getting there.
Sure. Yeah. So currently I'm in like a little transition period. So I have my own private practice. But I've had a private practice for years, but I went from a relatively a big practice that I owned to now it being just me, which it was a purposeful transition, mainly because I am doing a lot of other things and being able to have some flexibility in my world is was needed. So since July, I've left my group practice and now full time just by myself doing everything that we do in psychology, testing. I do a lot of work in therapy. And my background, I'm both a school psychologist and a clinical psychologist. So I kind of live in both of those realms. So about half of my practice is doing schoolwork, but then I also do forensic psychology and do some clinical work. So I kind of have my hands in a bunch of different clinical areas. So that's been fun. And then, also I've spent a lot of time writing. So I had two new books come out this year. So that's been exciting. Don't know if I'm ever going to do two at the same time. Again, that was maybe a little ambitious, but I like to write. So I've had written 10 books now, and I have a book series that's called School-Based Practice in Action that's published through Routledge Publishing. And we've so far done 20 books in that series, and we are in process of doing another 20 over the next 5 years. So those are fun because I get to edit and invite authors that are doing cool things in our field and get to listen to what they're doing and help them put it into a book format that we can get out there. So have that going on. And I am currently in the middle of test development with PAR. And we'll have our test, which is called the Christner Behavior and Adaptability Assessment System, will be out in the late summer of 2026. So we're currently in the standardization and refinement phase right now. So yeah, doing a whole bunch of fun stuff, which is great.
Wow. Okay. I want to ask you about this behavior and adaptability assessment system. Can you just tell us
Yeah.
a little bit? Give us a sneak peek. What's that all about?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit that I can say. So, so essentially, my work has been in basically school-based mental health for a lot of my career. One of the things that I've kind of found over the years is school psychologists, and I think even clinical psychologists struggle to um, differentiate diagnosis and help kind of figure out, what maybe is the underlying reasons the kid's having a difficulty. So this is going to be a rating scale similar to other scales that exist, but we've kind of taken a little different approach where we're not just looking at those symptoms that are related to basically psychopathology, and we're also looking at how lifestyle factors also impact. So we're looking at things like sleep and media and device use and all of these things that we hear about as professionals, but tying those in so we can really have a system where we can look at the whole child and not just looking at what the diagnosis is. So our goal for this is really to help conceptualize what's happening with the child. That will also help with diagnosis if that's needed. But then also, what do we do? So this is all going to be linked now to not only are we coming up with the assessment, but how's that linked to evidence-based interventions and that we can basically make recommendations that have pretty solid foundations. So this is going to be released in phases. So the first part we have coming out in 2026, but then over time, we're going to have more linked with the interventions and that part of the assessment. So it's been an awesome process. This has been, 5 years in the making. But it's something that I developed out of basically presenting to other psychologists. So traveling around and doing trainings, and people would say, "Oh, I wish I had something that asked this question." And so I would go back to my hotel room and I would write it down and go, "Oh, that's a really good idea. We should do that." And then over the years, it created kind of the framework that we were able to then develop this test from. So I like it because it's organic. It's not something we've based solely off of research. we listen to people in the field who are struggling to find answers, and we're hoping that we're going to provide a solution with this. So excited about it. It's been a fun and challenging process, but love doing it. It's been
Yeah.
great.
Oh, that's awesome. And it's kind of resonates with a consistent theme about a lot of things that we've talked about on this podcast too, which is when you're gonna, when you are thinking about doing something different, it's really important to gather information to see if like this is what problem exists out there, and
Right.
is your solution, do you have a solution to that problem? You know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what we do well as psychologists. It's can we identify the problem, and then, whether we help, coach somebody else along the process, or we're doing the solution on our own. Yeah, it's great to do. And I mean, I think that's most of my career has been developing things that have come out of either my own need or hearing other people. I mean, my even, the books that I've done, it's been because I couldn't find anything else out there. And I was like, okay, we're going to do a book on this, or we're going to do a training on this. And it was really just, I think there's a lot out there that we can do if we listen to other people. There's a lot of opportunities to create really great things. And it's awesome to see other people in the field do that as well. That, there's all kinds of exciting things happening that sometimes we don't pay enough attention to. So
Yeah. Yeah. So you're out there in Pennsylvania.
I am. Yeah.
Yeah. We're in California.
Yeah.
Um,
You're nice and warm. I'm in 30-degree weather. So
yeah, it is literally it says it's 66 degrees today. It feels like 70. It's so warm. Um,
yeah. We'll see that in March or April. That's
right.
yeah.
Well, I'm curious about um you said that you just had this large group practice and
Yeah.
you are now just kind of yourself because you needed more flexibility. What
Yeah.
did you find yourself, what was more inflexible about your role as a group practice owner, and what did you find yourself doing a lot of, and what has changed now that you're just by yourself?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things I think owning a group practice, and the practice that I had, we were at one time 30 people strong. So we're a bigger practice. Over time, we kind of consolidated some things and made it a little smaller over the last couple of years. But really the main difficulty with flexibility is, as an owner, you have to be there. I mean, you have to be there for employees. I mean, if you're going to create a culture that people want to work in, my belief is I'm the first one there, I'm the last one out. I'm going to be there, through thick and thin. And that's much harder when I'm out presenting and I'm doing all these other things. And I was able to do it, but I looked at it as, from a staff standpoint, that was creating a lot of privileges for me that my other staff couldn't have. That their income was really based on being there every day. And so over time, that was harder for me. And not that it couldn't have been done, like it absolutely could have been done, but from how I wanted to run the business, I thought it would be better to kind of step away and let myself kind of get into other things. As having, when you have a bigger business, there's a lot of employee stuff to deal with. There's a lot of business things. And so having a smaller amount to deal with is just, it's just easier. I miss it some days. Like I loved owning a group practice. I tell everybody it's an awesome thing to do. It was wonderful to be part of. It was just the right time for me in my career to make that transition. And luckily, I had employees that were interested in taking that over and kind of making it their own. So, this process took almost 2 years that we really went through to get here, because, we needed to kind of get them ready, and they had to, get everything up and running. So that made it easier for me. Like I never wanted to like sell the business to some big corporation. We're a small town. People trusted our services. So to put that in the hands of other people that I trust, that was really good. So yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is less administrative work, which again, days I miss, and I can do more clinical stuff. So most of my day now is with kids or with adults that I'm evaluating. And I didn't get to do that nearly as much when I was overseeing a whole company. So it just created a different level of balance for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really resonating for me because I feel like I have so much business stuff to do that I don't get to do the clinical practice as much as I'd like. And then it makes it
Yeah,
harder for me when I do,
it
I'm like,
does.
oh,
Yeah.
I got to put my mind on this. And then,
Yeah.
you're immediately pulled back to other things. And so it's really, I actually like get nervous, like, oh gosh, I'm going to forget. I better take really good notes. I'm going to, because switching your mind back and forth is difficult.
Yeah, and business happens whether you're in a session or not. And I mean, I think that's always, it through my career, like I would, be testing and I'd, be seeing messages coming up of things that were going on. And so you're right, you get done with that part of your job and you got to move into another one. And I don't want that to sound negative. I loved it. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, like I really did. I loved every part of it, but it's just hard to do. I mean, I
I,
think it's hard to kind of switch back and forth. And it's why as people get to a certain size, they really minimize their own clinical work. I had a hard time doing that. I mean,
Mhm.
for me, that's why I got into psychology. Like I wanted to be with people and doing things. So that created then I would do more time with working, doing more assessments or counseling. But then that means the business had to take, and work in the evenings, or I was coming in on weekends. So there's those parts that are a little bit difficult. And, again, I did it for, gosh, what, 15, 16 years. So I did it for a while and yeah, don't regret any of it. Loved it, but just now was that time for me to transition. And like I said, it's hard some days. There are days where I miss having a whole staff around that we can do things. Now it's me. I have one other person in my office who helps doing scheduling and all of those things. But it's just a different dynamic.
Yeah.
But it does free me up that, through the last few months, I've been traveling all over the country presenting, and I could do that because of now I have the flexibility that I can do it.
Right, right. Well, what are the kinds of trainings that you give and what do you talk about in all of these different states?
Yeah. So different things. So it really depends. So, probably what I present the most about is cognitive behavior therapy and how we use that with kids. One of the things that we've been working on the last few years has been on media and device use and how we can create healthier habits around that with kids. And so that's been part of it. Report writing is always a big topic. And then some just assessment issues, like there'll be, I'll do some with ADHD or I do some work with PAR that they have PAR talks. I don't know if
Mhm.
you've ever watched those.
Yeah.
So yeah, what I have coming up is on validity testing and how and why we should use that in our evaluations. So kind of a mix. Really anything that I do every day with kids, I probably have a presentation that I've done with it as well.
Yeah.
So it really kind of my clinical practice ties to usually what I present on. But this past, I guess, few months has really been a lot on either media and device use or cognitive therapy, mainly because the two books came out. They're both on cognitive therapy. So that's been kind of the hot thing right now.
Yeah, I listened to that podcast as well that you had a little while.
The media and device use
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's been a really kind of fun project that we, again, kind of fell into because we were seeing more and more parents come in saying, this is a problem for my child. They're gaming all night long. They're not getting homework done. And, oftentimes they would come in for ADHD evaluations, and we're like, no, it's, we have to cut back the 7 hours that they're gaming. And so we started approaching that from this idea that, abstinence is not an option. Like technology is going to be there. We have to learn how to coexist with it. So Jessica Stewart, who's a colleague of mine, she and I started working on it and going, okay, how can we approach this differently? And so we've developed some interventions that really are through cognitive behavior therapy that we can empower both kids and parents. And yeah, it's been really interesting. We thought it was going to be this small thing we were doing for ourselves, and then all of a sudden, we've written a couple book chapters on it. We've been traveling around, talking quite a bit about it. So it's kind of again taken off on its own, an idea that we tried to solve for ourselves, and then realized everybody else is dealing with the same issue. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been great. It's been fun to travel, and I always enjoy hearing what everybody else is doing across the country, which is always cool.
Yeah. Are you talking to schools or are you talking to like in clinical practice at different kinds of conferences or all of it?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. So, some have been for smaller psychology organizations that, they kind of come together, a few school psychologists, and they bring trainers in. Have been state conferences. Others have been for school districts, that I'll go and just talk to parents. So we'll do a little bit for the staff during the day, and then at night we'll do a parent kind of workshop on the same topic. So yeah, it really varies. Which is again kind of a fun process. Get to try a bunch of different things, and so a lot of different groups. Sometimes teachers will get into some teacher workshops. So it really does vary. But I'd say probably 90% are professionals within our field. So either school psychologists, educational psychologists, clinical psychologists, and even counselors and social workers. It'll be those groups mostly.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of assessment report writing, I
Yeah.
just want to ask you briefly because we get this question a lot. What do you feel like are the biggest differences between a school psychology evaluation and like a private practice evaluation? And how do you tackle that? And I know that you give a lot of talks on report writing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I try to tell people it shouldn't be that different. Like we try to create these divides professionally. And, my approach is we should be writing about kids. We shouldn't be writing about tests. I did not get in the field to write about a whisk. I got in the field to tell a story about kids that hopefully helps people understand what's happening. And so I don't think it should be different. I think sometimes it is, and we create these kind of boundaries of, oh, it has to be this way. My experience hasn't been that, in that, when I write about kids, everybody's happy. Parents are happy, teachers are happy, administrators are happy, because at the end of the day, that's what they want answers about. So I tend to write whether I'm working for a school district or I'm working in my practice. I write the same way. The format might be different in the sense of what the headings are called, because in PA we have all these state forms that we have to follow. But how I write really doesn't change very much. I talk all the time. We should write not for other psychologists. We should write for parents and other people to understand, who's our consumer. So, a lot of people probably would read my reports and go, wow, that seems really simplistic. Yeah, it really is. That's what we need to do. But my goal is I want parents to read it and go, oh, I get it. This makes sense. I understand this, and I know what to do with it. And the same for teachers. So, Yeah, I'm not a person that writes test by test. I really I always say I write by function. You know, what's going on with the kid? What is their language like? How do they interact with people? And again, kind of tell that story. And we do that, and we have good referral questions. We can then answer give really meaningful answers. So it's, at the end of the day, very few care about what their IQ is. I mean, there's some, but that's not mostly the case. They want to know why Billy's eloping from class. They want to know what's going on, what's that story behind it. So that's kind of how I write. And like I said, it tends to work. I mentioned I do forensic work. I really changed my report writing because of that. And part of it was I realized like judges and attorneys, they don't understand what we write either. And so they make assumptions about scores. And that's not downing them. That's not what their training is. And I was testifying and I had a judge ask me a question and I went, wow, like in my head going, I did a really bad job explaining this in the report if that's the question that they asked. And so again, I'm kind of a problem solver. So what I did was after that case was over, I asked if I could to have a conversation with the judge. And I said, how can I write better? Like, what would make you understand this that would be easier? And then I started asking attorneys, and then I started asking teachers, and I started asking pediatricians, and everybody said the same thing. We don't need 20 pages of this test measures this, and here's the score. We just want to know what's going on with the individual. And so from that point on, I started changing how I write. And, I have a couple different formats depending on how long they are. Legal cases are, of course, much longer reports because in some ways they need to be. But sometimes I have pediatricians that want to know, does this individual have ADHD? And is it appropriate for us to look at medication as an option? That can be 2 pages. I don't need to tell a long story for that. So I think when we think that way, it also takes that frustration of report writing burden that we all have felt when we work in schools, and we can change it. Sometimes my reports are really short because it's all I need. All I need to tell the story. So that's just my way of doing it.
Yeah. Have you written a book on it?
No, actually, I'm in the process though.
I was gonna
So
say,
it's actually,
yeah.
yeah, it was funny. I did a presentation for Illinois School Psychology Association and just here in the fall. And it was a virtual presentation. And someone afterward emailed me and went, gosh, I really wish that you had a book on this. And I went, yeah, that would be really cool to do. So I started kind of doing it. But I have, if anybody in your audience is interested, I have some reports that I usually will share with people if they want to see my style. I'm in the process of cleaning them up from a standpoint of making sure there's no identifying information, but I can give my email address. If people email me, I'll put them on the list that when we have them finished, I don't mind sharing them with others. And, not that it's perfect, it's just the way I do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would love to see them.
Yeah.
I
I'll
mean,
put you on the list.
yeah, put me on the list. Yeah, I mean, I
That's,
think it's a question, I feel like every assessment I do something a little different in my report, and I'm really trying to help my staff conceptualize kids in a way like you're talking about, like
yeah,
who is this kid and how is this information that we've gathered meaningful? And then is there a diagnosis or not? But regardless, can we answer the questions about the kid? And then if we have
right,
to talk about eligibility because it's an IEE, then
right.
we can. But the parents want to know who is my kid, and you want to say things in a way that the family and the educators who are going to help that student understand who they are and what they need.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think I couldn't agree with you more. I think that that is really the way we should do it. I, when I started too long ago in this field, it was always about answering, are they eligible or not? And I always thought it was wrong even 30 years ago. I was like, I remember being on internship going, well, that's it. Like I got into this field to say, yes, they qualify or no. Like, so if I say no, what happens? Like, then they still have the same problems. Like we solve nothing with our effort. And we tested, all this time we put into it to get nothing out of it makes no sense. And so, I that really for me was like, okay, we got to write different. We have to think about, again, answering questions. And, was lucky I had talking about mentorship. I had a mentor who said, don't just look at your permission to evaluate. Go sit down with the teacher and ask what questions they have. Call the parents on the phone and get questions and find out what do they want to really know. And so I did that early in my career. I think my report writing got better over time, but I've always kind of looked at it through that lens. Like, can I at least make sure I'm really answering the questions that they really want to know? And there are some parents I've had say, I want to know if they can get an IEP or not. Like that question comes up.
Yeah.
But when you really ask, I always I don't know if you've ever heard Stephanie Nelson speak, who's a
Yeah.
neuropsychologist, who's wonderful, brilliant person. But she talks about this kind of secret question, right? Like, what do they really want to know? Like, it's because it really isn't whether they get an IEP or not. That's
Right.
not the question. But can we really dig down deep enough that we can get the parents to say, hey, here's what I'm worried about. Like, are they going to live in my basement for the rest of their life? Like, is that where we're at? Like, are they ever going to make progress? And when you get parents there and even teachers there, it does change, I think, the dynamic, right? I mean, it's like when you get there and get really down to what are they worried about? What's really keeping them up at night? That's the real question. It's never about is it an IEP or not?
Right.
That's just the language that they know to use to get the help, to try to get the help that they want.
Yeah.
So I always look at it as, that when I hear that question, I'm always like, okay, there's a lot deeper. So then that's our job. How do we get curious and really get parents to say, hey, here's what I'm worried about. I'm worried that they're going to be reading at a second grade level when they graduate. Okay, that's a real worry. Like I get it. And how do we fix that? Or whatever it might be. So, yeah, I mean, I think I've just always approached that different and try to dig when I can. And some parents that we don't never get there. I don't ever get to that question, but I'd say 98% of the time when I really have a good conversation, I can get down to what that really that kind of secret or hidden question really is.
And do you actually write that question in the report?
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends. So that's an awesome question. I've debated with myself on this topic all the time because so I usually will tell parents how I do it now. For a while there, I would not. And that because I think parents didn't want necessarily that worded that way. And so over time, though, what I've done is I've said, listen, like I need to write this in a question and I'm going to answer in my report. Can we work on how to word that you're comfortable with? And so I'll usually throw out a sample of how I would word it. And most of the time they're okay with it. There's times that we have to, wordsmith a little bit because some of it's very personal. Some of there's it would be hard to write it as it was first articulated. But yeah, I tend to now, it just is probably been wordsmithed a bit to be a little protective for the parents or the teachers, whoever. I mean, I think it can go both ways.
Right.
But yeah, I usually will now put it in there. I just, like I said, just word it different.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking me along
Yeah, that's cool.
that journey. I want to ask you a bit about how you got to where you are today, because I think you've had a lot of different entrepreneurial experiences, and I want to know a little bit about those.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've always loved business. It's kind of even since I was young. Like, I mean, I laugh because even my parents will say, like, I kind of owned my first business at 11. Like, there was just no tax implications at that point. But I mean, I was the guy that was like, shoveling snow and cutting people's grass. Like, I always thought, like, I just always loved that. And when I was 18, I bought my first business. I bought actually, I was a DJ and would travel around doing different events. And so that was the first business I co-owned with a friend of mine. And it actually paid for me through grad school, which was
Wow.
awesome, like a great way to make extra money. And could do it in addition to having other jobs, which was great. And then, throughout my life, I mean, from a business standpoint, I've owned a number of businesses. My brother and I had a small venture capital company, so we purchased a variety of things. We owned everything from landscaping companies to restaurants to you name it. So we've kind of had our hands in a lot of different businesses. Which is exciting and fun and enjoy doing. And so, yeah, so I've throughout my life, I don't think since I was 18, have ever been without owning a business,
Huh.
which is kind of interesting. I just kind of thought about that, but it's pretty rare. I've always had something that, I was involved in, and luckily, many of them succeeded and did really well. And some didn't. It's the part of being in business. Sometimes they don't go as planned. But it's always been something I enjoyed. So that's always been, whether it's owning a private practice or owning other businesses, I've kind of always had my kind of feet in both arenas to some extent. So, and then psychology, I kind of fell into psychology. It was kind of interesting. So I actually thought I was going to be an attorney and then changed majors and thought I was going to be a funeral director, which I don't know where that came from, but yeah, that was on the list. And then I took my first psychology class in college. I took an intro to psych class. And I tell everybody, I knew like that day, like the first day of class, I remember going, oh my gosh, this stuff makes sense. Like I could see this in how TV ads work. Like I could see it in how they set up stores. So it just clicked with me. Like I loved psychology. And so I changed my major, I think probably 3 weeks into my intro to psych class and have never looked back. And then thought I was going to be a criminal psychologist. I was going to do forensics. So I interned while I was in college in a state prison, and was, again, awesome experience. And that's how I got into school psychology because I was running a group. And one day in group, one of the guys, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but basically said, "Why do you come here?" He's like, "Why are you like with us?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I love this. Like, this is," and I did. I loved it. And he said, "I had problems when I was 8." He's like, "When I was 8 years old, I remember like that's when my life changed." And he's like, "It never got back from that."
Wow.
And he's like, "You should do that. You should work with kids." And I'll never, I mean, it was such a vivid thing, and I tell this story all the time, but I remember like leaving there and the whole drive like home going, oh my gosh, like yeah, like how many of these guys in here, it started young at
Yeah.
8. And so 2 weeks later, I applied to go into school psychology. And so I canceled all the other college applications I had out there and went into school psychology and went, that's what I want to do. And then lucky for me, I was a school psychologist and then said, now I want to go back and retrain in clinical psychology. So I went back to school while I was working as a school psychologist and then did my doctorate in clinical. And then that's opened up, the rest of the world. So it's let me do all these other things with both degrees. And I love like I said, going into all different directions. It makes my week exciting. I can be in school today and a prison tomorrow, and that's fun. It's exciting. So yeah, it's been kind of a wild ride, but a fun ride. I mean, I tell you, I'm lucky. I get up every day. I love coming to work. Like I
Hmm.
do. I just love what I do. And my wife says I'll never retire. That's probably true
Yeah.
because I'm lucky. I mean, I love having the opportunities I've had. So it's been great.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great story. And so how did you throughout your psychology practice,
Yeah.
I just have a couple more questions, but throughout your psychology
Yeah.
practice, you worked in schools and then you started a private practice also,
Yeah.
like how did that come about?
Okay. So I worked in schools when I started in uh, working in Pennsylvania. We have what's called intermediate units, which are basically county-run service organizations that help schools with special education services and consulting services. So at the time that I came out of school, that's where most school psychology jobs were in Pennsylvania. You worked for one of the many intermediate units. So I worked for them and was placed in a school district full time and worked in a couple different buildings. And so I did that clear through while I was doing my doctorate. I stayed in that position. Luckily, had a wonderful supervisor who let that happen and allowed me to, you know, get to class in the evenings. And so I did that. And then when I finished my doctorate, I had an internship for a year. So I left that job for that year. And then when I came back, I only came back to that position part-time, and I taught at a university part-time. And then that eventually became a full-time position at the university. And then that's when I started my private practice because I got a release day to do one day of private practice while I was teaching. And so I started doing private practice. And as I'm sure you're aware, it doesn't take long that all of a sudden that one day you now have a 12-month wait list and you go, okay, now what? So the college I taught for, they allowed me to have a little extra release time to do more clinical work. And then I took that to a day and a half. And then eventually, a few years in, I went, all right, the need's pretty high to, here. And so I ended up going full time into private practice. And I still teach, but that's, much more of an adjunct than I am full time places. So yeah, it kind of just happened. I tell everybody when I started, I was the worst marketer ever. I didn't even have a telephone listed anywhere. I didn't have a website, and just it was a word of mouth organic business. And then it just kind of took off. And then after doing that for a few years, then that's when it turned it into the group practice. After about 3 years of doing it by myself, because even at full time, my wait list remained high, so I started adding people on. So, yeah, it just kind of happened. I never thought I was going to do private practice. Like I didn't. That was never like my vision. I was going to go to. It just happened that way.
Well, what kind of guidance would you give to people who, are potentially working in schools but might have other ideas for things that inspire them or that they want to do that are in the field, but maybe not just, in the school system?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, write your ideas down. That's start one. Like if you have one, write it down. I have a file of probably 2,000 that I've never gotten to. Like I write down everything, but start there. Like, people have good ideas. There's great ideas out there. And maybe it's not a private practice. Maybe it's something else in the field that you want to get into. There's options, but start there. And I think do a little research, and don't be intimidated by what you see online. This is much more doable than people think that it is. But do some research, learn a little bit about business, listen to some business podcasts. It's a great start. Read a couple books to understand financing. So get that, I think, start there. And then take the risk, to put it together a little plan and do it. And again, it doesn't always work. I mean, I tell everybody, I mean, I consult with a lot of businesses and a lot of people who are starting up, and I say often, like, it's a risk, but it's a risk worth taking. Like, if you never try, you're never going to know. And there's ways to make a calculated risk with it, and that's the key. Do the research. Um, but yeah, I had a mentor tell me one time, like, listen to your ideas. If you think it's a good idea and you're hearing other people think it's a good idea, give it a shot. Try it. I think people think that going into business is going to cost $100,000, and it's not. I mean, it's in the world of virtual work now, you could invest a very minimal amount and have a great outcome to it. So I think just kind of putting that plan together. I'm glad I've taken risks. I mean, it's been, they, again, haven't all worked out, but many of them have, which has been great. And even if it doesn't work out the first time, doesn't mean it's a bad idea. That's the other piece. I think I've had book ideas that got turned down by 3 or 4 publishers, and then it was the fifth one who was like, "Oh yeah, this is great. We'll publish it." I'm glad I didn't quit. They were sometimes my best-selling books. They've done better than anything else. So yeah, just because it's doesn't work the first time doesn't mean you can't modify it a bit and make it work.
Right. I love that. And so lastly, just tell me a little bit about the Psyched to Practice podcast, because people can listen into that. But where was the inspiration there, and what's your goal through that podcast?
Yeah, so Psych to Practice was a little bit of my COVID project. It was so my co-host Paul Wagner, who was a therapist at Cognitive Health Solutions, which was my group practice. Paul and I used to sit around during COVID in the after hours, and we would just talk psychology. We would just, he would, he's a newer professional, and he would just sit and, give, ask questions, and we would just banter back and forth. And one night I said to him, I said, yeah, this is what I miss in COVID. I miss being at like conferences where I can just sit in a lobby of a hotel with a bunch of brilliant people and have conversations. You always learn so much doing that. So he was like, why don't we record ourselves and do a podcast? And I went, who's going to listen to us talking psychology? I'm like, I said, like, really? And he's like, yeah, like, let's do it. It's not that hard. So we did. We just kind of started recording, and had friends that I was like, wow, let's ask this person to come on because they got great stories about how they got in the field, similar to, I think, what you do. And so we did. We started just kind of that process. So our goal with Psych to Practice has always been, how do we get good information about things that are happening in the field to professionals? And, some of our episodes sometimes are very casual and much more life, kind of specific, like how to do time management. But then other times we're doing things where, we've been able to bring great experts in to talk about books that they've written or research that they've done. And so it's been a wonderful process. My goal was like, okay, if I have 20 people that listen, we probably are doing pretty well. And yeah, we've exceeded that, and it's been fun. And I enjoy it. And going back to how we started, Paul and I have created this great mentorship for each other. It's been awesome. Where, I think he appreciates my expertise and experience, and I appreciate his innovation and going, wow, we can do that. Like, we can, do this on social media, or we can do these things. And it's been a win-win for us. And I look forward every time we have a chance to be together to record. It's been a great connection, and we're glad that it's gone the direction it has, and we continue to evolve it. We're actually in the process of being able to do continuing ed credits through our podcast, and now going to have actually some video trainings as well that we're going to be able to access for or have others access. So it's been a good project. What I thought would just last a few months. We've now been, I guess we're 3 years into this, so it's been fun, and I enjoy it, and I appreciate people actually listening, and hopefully if they could get one thing from it, we're happy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, I like to listen to podcasts in the morning as I'm getting
yeah,
ready or, on a walk or something,
yeah,
or at the gym. So yeah, I've caught some episodes that have been really great. So thank you for
yeah. And
that.
there's so many great podcasts out there. I
Yeah.
mean, like what you're doing is, wonderful. And we have so many colleagues that are doing really cool things.
Yeah.
And, I love, NASP now has Pete Faustino's podcast, which I've only listened to the first episode, but what great motivation to kind of listen to. So there's just good stuff out there.
Hmm.
That's all I listen to anymore. So,
Podcasts.
yeah,
Yeah.
podcasts. Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Well, Ray, thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Of course.
I've appreciated listening to your story and hearing what you've done in the field. And I look forward to seeing some of your reports. And
Yes, I got you on the list.
yeah, and potentially hiring you as a consultant to come into my practice. Like I feel like there are, like I'm always looking for ways for us to, as a little team to um, continue to grow how we do things, to diversify how we're providing what people need
Yeah.
in our community, and so I think we have to continue to be creative. And I think there's a lot of like, we do things this way because historically that's what we did. That's what we were taught in grad school. If I don't do it this way, then are people going to think this is as worth it? Or how much should I charge for that? I mean, there's so many questions you have when you start to make changes, right? But
Yeah.
I also, what you're saying really resonates with me. Just, answering like why do families come to us? What is it that they need, and how are we going to help solve their problem? And do we want to do that in a wordy way that they can't understand? Or do we want to figure out a way to answer their questions in a, simply and concisely, and
Yeah.
that going to be okay with us as,
Well, that's the hardest part, right?
yeah,
It's us, and and honestly, I appreciate what you're doing for the field and getting those in school psychology to think out of the box, because I think there's just so much out there, and we have to trust our skills. And I tell everybody, I've done a lot in my career now, but before I got my doctorate, I was still trying to do those things. And so I don't care where you're at in your career, you got a lot to offer. And I'm glad you're talking about that with people, because I think we some days in the daily grind lose sight of that. And it's easy to lose sight of that, but there's a lot more out there. And and you can do both of them. I mean, like I said, I know you've done the same thing. You worked while you did
yep,
private work, and but I'm glad you're talking about it and getting that information out there, because when I talk to school psychologists, I get excited about what they're doing, and
right.
I wish they were as excited as I get about it. So
Yeah, yeah.
thanks for what you do.
Sure. Yeah. No, we're an inspired bunch. And I think we, like you just said, the monotony and the kind of barriers that we face sometimes can like kind of push us down. And we have to remember how much we have to give. I think it really fights burnout. Doing something that you know that you're doing, whether it's a little bit or a lot, and doing your job, like whatever, you have to find what it is in you that keeps you connected to your life's purpose. And if you're doing that, then you're taking care of yourself so you can take care of others. And it keeps us inspired instead of
Yeah.
like kind of being in a monotony of, burnout or, you know.
Yeah. And connecting, you said that a couple times, and I think that's key. Connect to other people and do things with other professionals. If you work by yourself in a district, I tell people all the time, there's a lot of people who, if you reach out to, they're willing to talk to you. I mean, even people that I think people think are big names in the field where they're like, oh, I can't approach that person. No, they'll absolutely, they'll talk with you, they'll engage with you, they'll help you. Like we have a great profession for that. I tell people I go to NASP and I'll go to those conferences. I approach people, I ask them questions, and so yeah, tell people have to do that. It's a great way to, when you're feeling isolated, to go, hey, I'm not alone. There's a lot more out there. So
Yeah. It's how I got you on the podcast, right?
that's right. That's how we met. Naya. That's right. That's right.
I was like, ooh, I know that guy. I'm gonna go talk to him. And you were in a group of people, and I was like, I'm gonna wait, and I'm gonna go talk to him. I'm gonna, because I wanted to get a conversation with you, whether or not you agreed to the podcast. I just wanted to have a conversation with you, because that you're exactly right. Like, the people in our field don't want to be isolated. They're just like us.
Yeah.
We're all in it together.
Yeah. I think I tell the story on the podcast you mentioned that we did on mentorship, but I think I told the Phil Zimbardo story.
Yeah. But say it on here in case people.
Yeah. So I tell everybody I was a student, and I was in line and introduced myself to Philip Zimbardo, who, I knew about in Intro to Psych, and he was just standing behind me in line. And it was, I was like, okay, I'm just going to say hi and introduce myself. Thought I'd get blown off. And he was, it was very nice. And I went and sat down with my lunch, and then he came over and he's like, tell me about yourself. Tell me what you're doing. And that changed my career. Like, I say this all the time. Like, I was like, wow, like he spent probably a good half hour just talking, and I got to ask really cool questions about his prison studies and things that were just fascinating. But the other part was, he was so interested in what I did, and I was like, wow, this is a guy who is a legend by probably every standard in the field. And he would never remember me after that, but I had 30 minutes of just him being comfortable sitting down and chatting with me and sharing his knowledge. And from that point on, I have no concern approaching people, because I'm like, worst thing they say is no. But I will tell you, and you probably have experienced, I don't know that I've ever had anybody that's completely like blown off me chatting with them. Most people are like, yeah, let's grab coffee, or hey, send me an email, we can chat virtually. So yeah, there's good people out there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being a great person on this show.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Absolutely. This episode of the Empower LEP podcast is brought to you by one of my newest trainings on the Empower LEP platform, How to Network and Grow Your Business. This was one of my favorite trainings to record, because it's one of my favorite things to do. And while this may not be one of everyone's favorite things to do, networking is absolutely essential for growing your practice. So we are going to talk about all things networking in this course. It is self-paced. You can get it on empowerlep.com. Thank you for listening to the Empower LEP podcast. Episodes can be found at empowerlep.com. If you liked what you heard, please leave a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast player. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any questions for me, don't hesitate to connect. I would love to learn more. I can be found at Jana at empowerlep.com.